There were 4 grandchildren at that table, and 3 of them got a $38 steak. My daughter got a placemat. Not a plate. A placemat and a paper cup of crayons the hostess brought over because she felt sorry for her. Wren was 7 years old. She sat with her hands folded in her lap the way you do when you're trying to make yourself smaller, and she watched her cousins cut into their food, and when my mother finally noticed me noticing, she smiled and said, "Oh, honey, we didn't know if you'd make it." And my father said, without lifting his eyes from his plate, "You should have fed her before you came." No. I'm a 911 dispatcher. I have talked a man through his wife's cardiac arrest while he screamed at me. I have counted compressions out loud for 11 minutes for a stranger in the dark. So when I tell you something, and me went very flat and very quiet at that table, understand that flat and quiet is how I sound right before I start giving orders. I smiled at my mother. I said, "Noted." Then I raised my hand for the waiter, and I asked him one question, and the temperature of that entire restaurant dropped 15 degrees. But that dinner was the polite part. 3 weeks later, a loan officer turned her monitor toward me and showed me something that made a placemat look like a love letter. And what I found after that, in a wooden box in the back of my mother's pantry, cost me every single seat at that table. I'd do it again tomorrow, twice if the second time was on a Sunday. Welcome back to the channel, where quiet people finally stop paying for everybody else's dinner, and where the family secrets get read out loud in full with the totals. If you have ever been the one who reaches for the check because you already know nobody else is going to, this story is for you. Do me a favor before we start. Drop a comment telling me where you are watching from, and hit subscribe, because the ending of this one took me 22 years to earn, and I want you sitting right next to me when it lands. The Copper Ox is where Harrow Bend, Michigan goes when something official has happened. Graduations, retirements, funerals with good insurance, dark wood, low lamps, a fireplace at the long end of the dining room, and a menu with no prices on the version they hand the guest of honor. That October, the occasion was my father. 41 years at the paper mill on the east side of town, gone now, a pension and a plaque and a party. My sister Bryn had booked the long table by the fire. She'd called ahead that afternoon and pre-ordered for everyone because Bryn likes to be the one who arranges things, and because arranging things is how you decide who gets what without ever having to say it out loud. The food came out like a parade. A ribeye for Sawyer, who is 9, a ribeye for Piper, who is 6 and eats mostly crackers, a ribeye for my brother Grant's boy Elliot, who is 11 and had headphones around his neck the entire meal. 3 children's plates with 3 grown men's steaks on them, cut into cubes by their mothers, half of it destined for a to-go box that would live in somebody's fridge until Thursday. And then the parade stopped. Nothing came for Wren. My daughter looked at the space in front of her, then up at me, and I watched a 7-year-old do arithmetic she should not have known how to do. She reached over and moved her water glass into the middle of her placemat so it wouldn't look so empty. Bryn didn't even pause her story. She said, "Oh, we didn't order for Wren. The kids' menu here is depressing anyway." The kids' menu that her 3 nephews and niece were not eating from. My mother, Vivian, studied her wine like there was something written in it. My father, Warren, cut his steak and said the thing about feeding her before we came, and the table laughed a little, the small laugh families use to sand the edges off something. Wren said very quietly, "It's okay, Mom, I'm not that hungry." She was starving. She'd had a granola bar in the car at 4 o'clock because I'd worked a double and we came straight from the sitter. Here's what I want you to understand about that moment. It wasn't the money. It was never the money. It was that the machine had run the numbers on a 7-year-old and decided she didn't clear the threshold. I raised my hand. Our waiter came over, a young guy, maybe 22. "Name tag," said Anthony. And I asked him one question. "Are you still serving the full menu?" He said, "Yes, Mom." I said, "Then my daughter would like the ribeye medium with the mashed potatoes and whatever the biggest chocolate thing you have back there is, and Anthony," and I said this part clearly because clarity is my whole job, "put ours on a separate check, just hers and mine." That table went still, not shock still. My family goes still the way a machine goes still when it's calculating whether it needs to correct something. My mother leaned toward me, voice soft as buttercream. "Sweetheart, you'll split the main check with Cody, won't you? Your father's on a fixed income now." And there it was, right on schedule. Because here's what you need to know about the last 5 years of dinners in my family. Every single one of them was announced as Dad's treat. And every single time when the check came, my father would pat his jacket, and my mother would murmur something about his back and the mill and how they'd have to be careful now, and that check would slide down the table toward me and my brother-in-law Cody. And then Cody started forgetting his wallet. Not every time. Just often enough that I stopped being surprised, which is the exact moment a pattern becomes a policy. I had actually done the math in the car on the way over. Birthdays, Easters, 2 graduations, a baby shower, a christening, 3 of these mill family dinners. I had been quietly funding my family celebrations since Wren was in diapers. So when Anthony set that steak down in front of my girl, and she looked up at me like I had pulled a rabbit out of a hat, like she wanted to check with me first whether it was allowed, I stood up. Not fast. Not loud. I'm a dispatcher. I don't do scenes. I do announcements. Wren and I are going to finish our dinner, I said. I'm paying our check, ours only. And starting tonight, the family bank is closed. My mother's mouth opened. Bryn laughed one sharp note, waiting for the punchline. There wasn't one. Wren ate every bite of that steak, every bite. She ate it slowly and seriously, the way kids eat something they've decided is important, and then she ate most of a piece of chocolate cake the size of a brick. And I drank my coffee at exactly the speed I wanted to drink it, because we were not going to be hurried out of that room. Then I put cash on our check, tipped Anthony 30%, took my daughter's hand, and walked out past 41 years of service and 3 uneaten steaks. Driving home, I honestly believe that was the worst thing my family had ever done to me. I was off by $11,600. Let me back up and tell you who I am, because it matters for everything that comes next. My name is Delaney Ross. Everybody calls me Lainey. I'm 36, and I work the overnight desk at the County Dispatch Center in Harrow Bend. I am the voice people hear on the worst night of their life. Calm isn't my personality. Ask anyone who's ever ridden in a car with me. Calm is a job requirement. It's a muscle. You build it or you burn out. Wren's father was named Danny. He was a lineman for the power company, and 4 years ago, in an ice storm in February, he went up in a bucket to restore power to the south side of town, and he did not come down. I was 32 years old, and I had a 3-year-old, and I signed my name to about 200 pieces of paper in the 4 weeks that followed, most of which I could not tell you the contents of today. Remember that, 200 pieces of paper. It comes back. The life insurance paid out. It sounds like a lot until it isn't. It buried him. It cleared the truck, and the credit cards, and the 6 months of my hours I couldn't work. What was left I put into an account with Wren's name on it and a maturity date of her 18th birthday, and I have never touched $1 of it, not once, not even the winter the furnace went out, and I heated a 2-bedroom apartment with the oven door open and a lot of blankets. My family knew about that account. My family has always known about that account, and in a way I didn't understand at the time. Everything that happened over the next 4 months was my family trying, in their extremely polite way, to get into that account. Here's what my schedule looked like. Nights on the desk, Wren at the sitters, 4 hours of sleep in the middle of the day, school pickup, dinner, homework, do it again, and here is what else it included. 5 years ago, my mother started having trouble with her insulin costs. Nobody asked me for anything. My mother is far too skilled for that. She just said in a certain tone that they were figuring it out, and I started sending $350 on the first of the month. Nobody ever asked me to stop, so it never stopped. 3 years ago, Bryn opened her salon, Bloom and Vine, out on Route 6, with the good chairs and the neon sign. And my mother pressed a pen into my hand across the kitchen table and told me the build-out loan was $36,000 and the bank wanted a co-signer, and it was only a formality. Lainey, your sister will pay every cent. And for 2 years, Bryn actually did. I want to be clear, because I know how this sounds. I was not a doormat. I said no to plenty. I said no to a timeshare in Gaylord. I said no to Cody's food truck idea. I said no to a boat twice. And every single no cost me a week of my mother's wounded silence and a month of the family phone tree calling to make sure I was doing okay, which in my family is a threat with a bow on it. I paid the $350 because it was cheaper than the alternative, and the alternative was watching my daughter get quietly frozen out of Christmas. I thought I knew exactly what my family cost me. It turned out I only knew the line items they let me see. Now let me tell you what I wanted, because this whole story is really about a house. There's a yellow farmhouse on Quarry Lane, 4 blocks from Wren's school, 2 bedrooms, a sunroom on the back with about 9 windows, a crooked porch step, and a crabapple tree in the yard that drops pink all over the grass in May. It had been on the market 91 days because the kitchen is from 1974, and people are cowards. I had $31,000 saved for the down payment. Every dollar of it was overtime. Every dollar of it was holiday shifts. Nobody wanted because they pay time and a half, and Christmas mornings opened at 2 in the afternoon when I got home, and store brand everything, and 1 vacation in 4 years, which was 3 days at a state park and a borrowed tent. Every deposit had a purpose, and the purpose had a bedroom window facing east. The first time I took Wren to see it, she walked straight through the empty living room to the small bedroom at the back, put both hands flat on the window glass, and said, "Is this one mine?" I already knew. I had measured with my eyes exactly where her bed would go, left wall, under the window, so the morning would land on her instead of an alarm clock. My loan officer at the credit union was a woman named Renata Cobb, who has the personality of a filing cabinet, and I mean that as the highest compliment I can pay a human being. She liked my file, 11 years at the same employer, clean payment history, real down payment, debt to income like a Sunday morning. She said, "We get you through underwriting, we hold your rate, you're in that house by Christmas." All I had to do was pass underwriting. People think underwriting is paperwork. It isn't. Underwriting is an X-ray. It finds everything, including the things you didn't know were inside you. 3 weeks after that steak dinner, my phone rang at 7:15 on a Sunday evening, and loan officers do not call at 7:15 on a Sunday evening with good news. But before I tell you what Renata found, I have to tell you about the phone tree, because the family got to me first. The morning after the copper ox, I woke up to 14 missed calls. My mother's voicemail led the parade, doing that trembling thing her voice does at church and during confrontations. "You humiliated your sister in public, Delaney, in public, after everything this family has done for you and that little girl." Bryn posted a photo of a sunset with a wine glass in front of it and the caption, "Some people make everything about money. Praying for them." 41 likes. 2 of them from women I went to high school with who slid into my messages that week to ask, delicately, if I was doing okay since Danny. Cody sent me a single text of pure moral authority, not cool Laney. By Wednesday, my Aunt Junie called, which is how I knew my mother had escalated to the reserve. Junie, to her credit, mostly listened. The rest of the family did not. I know exactly how the system works because I have watched it run my entire life. In my family, I was never a person who could be hurt. I was a patient who had gone off her medication, and every relative in a 50-mile radius had been deputized to talk me back into treatment. The treatment was compliance. I didn't apologize, I didn't explain. I typed and deleted about 11 different paragraphs, and in the end, I sent nothing at all, and the silence felt like 2 things at the same time. It felt like freedom, and it felt like shoplifting. That's the part nobody warns you about with boundaries. The first ones feel like theft, because you were raised to believe that the thing you're taking back was never yours to begin with. Sunday night, my mother sent one last text, and the sweetness of it should have been a siren. "We'll talk it through at dinner next week, sweetheart. We're still your family. Everything in this family is accounted for." I read that as a peace offering. It was not a peace offering. It was an accounting term. And my mother has never once in her life used an accounting term loosely. I went to that Sunday dinner because Wren asked to see her grandpa, and because I don't hide from rooms. We were barely past the green beans when Bryn unveiled what she called an opportunity. Sawyer had been invited onto the travel hockey team, the good one, the one with the away tournaments and the crest on the jacket, and the season buy-in was $6,200, due the 15th. She looked at me the way you look at a vending machine you've already put money into. "You're his only aunt, Laney." I set down my fork. No, that was the whole sentence. I've learned not to attach an essay to it, because an essay is just a handle for somebody else to grab. The air in that dining room turned to glass. My father pushed back his chair and went out to the porch to look at a truck he has looked at for 20 years. Piper asked if anybody was going to eat the last roll, which was honestly the most reasonable question asked in that house all night. My mother stood, smoothed her skirt, and asked me to help her in the kitchen, which in our house is not a request. She ran the taps so nobody could hear, and what she said next she said gently, the way you'd explain the rules to a child who isn't quite keeping up. Every family runs on contributions, Delaney. Your sister brings the shine, the grandbabies, the holidays, the family we show the world. You bring the ballast. She turned off the water and dried her hands. That's the order of things, and you have always been so good at it. She wasn't being cruel. I want that understood. My mother was reading me my job description off a card she'd been holding since I was 12. On the drive home, my phone lit up with Renata Cobb's number, and my stomach dropped before I even answered. Lainey, we need to talk about your credit file. Can you come in tomorrow morning? Renata's office smelled like burnt coffee and printer toner, and she did not waste either of our time. Underwriting flagged 2 items, she said, and turned her monitor toward me. The first one I half expected, though seeing it still made my ears ring. The salon build-out loan I'd co-signed for Bryn was 91 days past due. My sister had stopped paying in July. Around the same time, and I would work this out later, the salon got a new sign, and Cody got a boat after all. 91 days of missed payments, and every one of them had landed on my credit like a dropped tray in a quiet room. The score I had kept spotless for 11 years had a dent in it, the size of a $36,000 loan. Okay, I said, writing it down, because writing things down is how I stay calm. That one I can explain. What's the second flag? Renata clicked once. The MasterCard ending in 388. Balance is $11,600, but the payment history is actually excellent. We just need documentation on the utilization. I looked at the screen. I looked at her. Renata, I don't have a MasterCard. The room got very quiet. She scrolled up, slowly. The way you turn over a card you already suspect is bad. Account opened 4 years ago. Billing address, 8112 Hollis Road, my parents' house. Balance, $11,600. Minimum payment made on time, every single month for 4 years. Never late, never flagged, never once mailed to me. Somebody had opened a credit card in my name. And then, this is the part that still takes the wind out of me, somebody had taken care of it, faithfully, the way you maintain a machine you intend to keep using for a long time. Renata folded her hands and asked me the gentlest, brutal question I have ever been asked. Lainey, whose handwriting would be on that application. I didn't answer. I was staring at the open date. February, 4 years ago. Card was opened 11 days after we buried my husband. The month I signed 200 pieces of paper and could not have told you what a single one of them said. That night I worked a full 12, because emergencies do not care about your family, and there is a mercy in that. At 4 a.m, I talked a 19-year-old through a seizure her boyfriend was having on a kitchen floor, and for 11 minutes I was the calmest person in Harrowbent. Then I came home, poured coffee at 8 a.m. like a lunatic, and pulled my full credit reports from all 3 bureaus. Dispatchers chart before they diagnose. You write down what is true, in order, before you let yourself decide what it means. So I charted. Card ending 338, opened online. The email on the account was a string of letters I'd never seen in my life. The recovery number was my parents' landline, the number I memorized in 2nd grade, the one I can still hear my mother answering with that bright little rising, Ross residence? And then the transaction history, 4 years of it. Reading it was like watching a stranger live a comfortable little life while wearing my name. The pharmacy on Wallace Street, the grocery store, my mother's hairdresser every 5 weeks, regular as a tide, $600 at a salon supply wholesaler in Grand Rapids over and over, which told me something about Bloom and Vine I hadn't wanted to know, $1,500 at a hockey outfitter last September, a vet bill, a Christmas at the outlet mall, and the Cobber Ox again. And again, and again, and again. I scrolled to October, and there it was. My father's retirement dinner, $641.18, posted the following Tuesday. I sat in my kitchen at 8:30 in the morning with the sun coming up wrong, and I did the math. 3 rye-bays were bought for 3 grandchildren that night with a credit card wearing my name. My daughter got a placemat. My father patted his jacket. My mother murmured about the fixed income. Dad's treat. I didn't throw anything. I want that on the record because I was extremely tempted. I made a spreadsheet instead, dates, amounts, categories, and I labeled the tab the way I'd label anything on the job, plain language, no adjective. Then I sat back and looked at the one thing the spreadsheet couldn't explain away. There were 2 people living in that house on Hollis Road. Only one of them kept the books. I drove out to Hollis Road on my day off with the printouts in a folder because I wanted to watch my mother's face when she saw them. I have spent 11 years listening to what people sound like in the first 3 seconds after they're caught. Fear sounds one way, guilt sounds another. Panic has a pitch you can almost tune a guitar to. My mother, Vivian Ross, looked at 4 years of fraud spread across her own kitchen table and gave me a third thing entirely. Administration. She read the first page, took off her reading glasses, folded them with a small click. Your credit was the cleanest in the family, she said. We put it where it would do the most good. That's what family is for, Delaney. No flinch, no denial. She said it the way a treasurer reads the minutes of a meeting. I asked her if she understood what she had actually done, and she straightened up, offended at last, but offended at the wrong thing entirely. Not one late payment in 4 years. Not one. I protected your name like it was my own. And that's when I understood the size of the room I was standing in. My mother did not believe she had stolen anything. In her mind, she was managing a shared family asset. And the asset was me. I told her the account had to be closed and my name cleared because I was buying a house. She actually laughed. One small note, tipped her head. A house, she smiled. And who put you through the Dispatch Academy? Who watched that baby for free for 2 years so you could work nights? Delaney, you're an investment. Investments pay out. That's the order of things. There it was again. The order of things, handed down like it was carved on a tablet somewhere. Noted, I said. And this time the word didn't feel like manners. It felt like a pen scratching a line into a book she couldn't see. The whole time we talked, my father stood in the doorway drying the same coffee cup. He never said a word. I told myself he didn't know. I needed one parent who didn't know. I found my father in the pole barn the next evening because the pole barn was ours. That's where he taught me to change oil and gap a spark plug. That's where he'd hand me a root beer and we'd both hide from whatever weather was blowing through the kitchen. He was at the bench, wiping his hands on a rag, and he kept wiping them long after they were clean. Did you know? I said. No folder this time, just the question. My dad is not a talker, so when he finally answered, I could hear how long the answer had been sitting there, rehearsed. Your mother has kept this family fed for 41 years, he said. A card inside the family isn't stealing, Laney. Then he looked at me, and his eyes did something his mouth wouldn't. They apologized. Don't make this big, please. I don't have the strength for big anymore. I stood there in the smell of 2-stroke oil and did the one kind of math I had never allowed myself to do. And then he made it worse, because he thought he was making it better. Anyway, that card's how your sister keeps the shop stocked. Your mother lets her run the supplies through it. He shrugged, helpless. You'd rather Bryn lost the salon with 2 kids? The salon, the one with my signature on the loan, 91 days delinquent, still open, still ordering, still running on a card wearing my name. My father, the man who taught me to check my own oil so I'd never have to trust anybody with my car, had handed it over himself. I didn't yell. There wasn't anyone in that barn to yell at, just a tired man who had traded his spine for quiet, one small surrender at a time, over 41 years. I kissed his cheek, because he is still my dad, and I walked out of that barn with one less parent than I walked in with. Renata set up a call with the card issuer's fraud department, and by Thursday I was in her office learning that the road forked and there was no third path. Option 1, absorb it, pay or settle the 11-6, call it mine, keep the peace. But that balance would sit in my debt to income like a stone in a shoe. My score would need months to heal. My rate lock, 45 days, starting that Friday, would expire long before I did. The yellow house would go back on the market, and some other family's kid would get the east-facing window. Option 2, call it what it is. File a formal identity theft claim. Sign a notarized affidavit. Open a police report. The issuer suspends the disputed balance from my liability and sends documentation my underwriter can actually accept. The house stays possible. The timeline holds. There was exactly one line item in option 2 that wasn't about money. The affidavit requires you to name the person who used your information, even a family member. A name. Renata slid the packet across the desk and said the truest sentence anybody said to me that entire year. Fraud isn't fraud until you're willing to write down who did it. If you have ever pulled your own credit report with your heart in your throat or found out somebody had been quietly spending your name, tell me in the comments what you did. I read every single one. And if you're still with me, subscribe, because the dinner where all of this finally ends is coming. And there's an envelope on that table you are not going to believe. I took the packet home, but before I signed anything, I wanted my copy of the salon cosign agreement because my copy was missing the page with the payoff terms, and I wanted to know exactly what I was holding. My father keeps every document in that house in one place. Always has. First, though, I tried to be reasonable. I want to be able to tell Ren someday that I tried. I asked for a family meeting. I came with an actual plan, typed and stapled, 3 copies. 1, my parents moved the MasterCard balance into their own names, a balance transfer. 1 afternoon of paperwork. 2, Bryn and Cody refinance the salon loan into their names and take my signature off it. 3, nobody calls the police. Nobody's name goes into a file anywhere. Everybody simply carries what is already theirs, which, I realize now, was the most radical proposal ever made at that table. Cody crossed his arms and delivered his expert financial opinion. Nobody's refinancing at these rates, Lainey. That's financial literacy. This from a man whose boat payment I could see on my own credit report. Bryn went liquid. Real tears. And that's the thing about my sister. The tears are always real. They're just always for herself. You'd put Mom in a police file over a credit card. What is wrong with you? And I watched it happen, right there over the pot roast, the reframe. In the space of one dinner, the woman whose name was stolen became the woman attacking her family. My mother let the noise run itself out. Then she folded her napkin and issued the ruling. This family does not sign papers against each other. I looked around that table, and I did something I don't recommend unless you're ready for the answer. I counted the papers already signed. The cosign with my name on it. The credit application with my name on it. 60 months of transfers. Every paper in this family had been signed in exactly one direction, quietly against me. Fine. If nobody was going to hand me the missing page, I'd go find my own copy. Sunday morning, my parents were at church. I still had a key, because I was the daughter you could trust with one. The filing cabinet is in the back of the pantry, under the shelf where my mother keeps the canning jars. I found the salon folder in the second drawer, found the payoff page right where it should have been, slid it into my bag. If I had stopped there, this would be a different story. But when I stood up, my elbow knocked the shelf and something shifted at the back, behind the pickled beets, behind the pressure canner she hasn't used since 2011. A wooden box. Recipe card size, dark with age, brass hinges. My grandmother's, I recognized it, on the lid on a strip of masking tape in my mother's neat upright capitals, one word. Recipe! I want to tell you that I hesitated. I didn't. It was full of index cards, and not one of them was a recipe. They were sorted with little tabs, alphabetical, in my mother's handwriting, and the second card in the first tab said Delaney across the top. My whole childhood was in that box, itemized. The first entry was dated the year I turned 11. Braces, 3,400, class ring, 89, winter coat, 62, Banch of Chicago, 210, driving lessons, 240, dispatch academy fees, 1 at ADD. And down the right margin of every card, in a narrow little column, a number, 4%. My mother had been charging me interest before I was old enough to have a job. And then the cards marked paid and God, the things that counted as payment. Every summer I babysat Bryn, logged. Every Saturday I worked the counter at the hardware store at 16. The paychecks my mother said she'd hold for me, entered line by line and signed off in her pretty slanted hand. And then I flipped to the B tab, friends cards, cheer camp, a prom dress from a real boutique in Grand Rapids, her wedding, $12,000 for her wedding, first and last month on their first apartment, cosmetology school. And next to every single entry, where my cards had amounts and interest, hers had one word, gift. I stood in that pantry holding the arithmetic of my entire life, and I finally understood the retirement dinner. The empty placemat wasn't an oversight. It wasn't even meanness. It was policy. And then I got to the card at the very back, where the ink was still dark, and the newest card in that box did not have my name on it. The heading was 2 initials. W.R. Persess. It started 14 months ago. School shoes, 54. The light-up sneakers my mother handed her in September. Wren wore them to bed the first night because she loved them too much to take off. Bicycle, $89.99. Purple bike, streamers on the handlebars, my father running alongside her, holding the seat, both of them laughing so hard he had to stop and put his hands on his knees. Backpack, 31. Zoo trip, 44. Winter boots, 58. Gifts, that's what we call them. That's what my 7-year-old said thank you for in a card I helped her spell. Every single one of them entered as a receivable. They had opened an account on my daughter before she could read the word account, and they were already keeping it current. And my father's voice floated up out of that restaurant. You should have fed her before you came. And I finally heard the sentence underneath the sentence. In my family, you don't feed the ones who owe you. You feed the ones you're investing in. I closed the box. I did not photograph a single card. And I know half of you just yelled at your screen, so let me explain. A photograph makes it evidence. Evidence means attorneys arguing over a box of index cards, and a judge trying to decide whether a woman writing down what a coat cost is a crime. It isn't. It's a symptom. I didn't need it for evidence. My evidence was the bank's own records, 4 years of them, time-stamped and boring and unarguable. I needed it for a diagnosis. I put it back behind the pickled beets, squared it up the way my father would, locked the door behind me, and sat in my car in their driveway for 10 minutes with my hands at 10 and 2. There were no tears in that driveway. Dispatchers don't cry mid-shift. We plan the response. I had spent 22 years trying to pay off a debt, and that afternoon, sitting in that driveway, I finally understood the design flaw I'd been living inside. The debt was the point. It was never meant to be paid off. Paid off daughter might leave. That night I called my Aunt Junie, my mother's younger cousin, the only relative in that entire family who has never once asked me for money, which by then felt like a superpower. And I asked her a question I had never thought to ask in 36 years. Junie, what was my mom like when she was a girl? Junie was quiet long enough that I heard her turn off her television. You found the box, she said, not a question. And then she told me about the cigar box. My grandmother Ada kept it on top of the refrigerator. From the week my mother turned 15, half of every paycheck from the root beer stand out on Route 6 went into that box. Every Friday, Ada called it board. Her little brother, my Uncle Denny, paid nothing. Not a dime, not ever. And when Denny turned 18, Ada bought him a truck outright, and my mother stood at that kitchen sink washing dishes she had helped pay for while he honked the horn in the driveway. Your mama fed that box until the week Ada died, Junie said. Better part of 35 years, one envelope at a time, never missed, never once got thanked. I sat there with my coffee going cold, staring at my own kitchen and half expecting a cigar box to appear on top of my refrigerator. She didn't invent that arithmetic, honey, Junie said. She inherited it. And then she said the thing I have carried in my pocket ever since, the way you carry a smooth stone. But inheriting a knife don't mean you've got to hand it down blade first. I almost felt sorry for my mother that night. I'm telling you honestly. I sat in the dark and I got about 90% of the way to sorry. Then I remembered whose initials were on the newest card in that box, in fresh ink, in that same careful hand. Sorry could wait. My daughter could not. Monday morning, before my shift, I did 3 things in 1 hour at my kitchen table, and any one of them alone could not be undone. I canceled the $350 monthly transfer. 5 years old, faithful as a church bell, dead in 2 clicks. I froze my credit at all 3 bureaus so that nobody on this earth could open anything new wearing my name ever again. And I filed the formal dispute on the MasterCard ending in 338. Because here's what Renata had told me. Once a dispute is filed, the issuer mails written notice to the address on the account. Not to me, to the address on the account. 8212 Hollis Road. I didn't send my family a letter. I let the bank do it. Banks don't soften the font. Then I went to work and ran a completely normal shift, and I want you to know my hands were steady the whole night. That's the thing about finally acting. All the shaking happens in the before. 3 days later, the $350 did not land in my mother's account for the first time in 5 years, and my phone lit up like a board full of calls. You forgot the transfer, sweetheart. I hadn't forgotten. I had remembered for the first time that my father has a pension and a paid-off house, and a wife with a genuine gift for arithmetic. I turned the phone face down and let the silence talk. It was the same silence I'd practiced after the steak dinner, but it had changed jobs. It wasn't guilt anymore. It was policy. Saturday morning at 8, my doorbell rang. Through the peephole on my welcome mat stood my mother, holding a white envelope like a summons. I opened the door. I did not open the conversation. She held it up, the bank's dispute notice, already opened, already read. Her voice had lost all the frosting. You reported your own mother. I kept mine level, dispatcher flat. I reported a card I never opened. The bank decided who that involved. We looked at each other through the cold, 2 women holding 2 completely different stories about the same piece of paper. And then I said I had to get Ren to swim lessons, and I closed the door gently, which in my family is the loudest thing a person can do. The counterattack took about 48 hours to organize, which for my mother is slow. In her version, I was drowning. A widow raising a girl alone, grief-stricken, confused, signing things 4 years ago I had surely agreed to and forgotten in my state. The word unstable got typed in a group chat by a cousin and never retracted. The phrase, ever since Danny did a lot of heavy lifting. Her church circle heard she was being persecuted by an ungrateful daughter. 2 aunts went quiet on me. 1 uncle reacted with a thumbs up to something I can't unsee. But there was one message, late on the second night, from my cousin Marcus, sent privately. You okay? For whatever it's worth? I once watched your mom write down what everybody brought to Grandma Ada's funeral. In a notebook, the casseroles too. I stared at that text for a long time. So other people had seen the arithmetic. They'd just never stood close enough to get entered into it. I didn't post my side. I didn't correct the record. They could have my reputation for a season. They could not have my signature, ever again. And then Tuesday, the collector called, and the number they dialed was the dispatch center. There is a phone at the supervisor's desk that exists for chiefs and hospitals and the state police. On Tuesday afternoon, in the middle of a shift change, it rang for me. A collections agent calling about a delinquent commercial loan on the floor of a 901 center. Bryn had listed my work number as a reference on the salon paperwork. Of course she had, and 91 days of her silence had finally rolled all the way downhill to a stranger reading a script at a woman with a headset around her neck. My supervisor handed me the message slip with the careful non-expression we use for people in denial, and I felt the heat crawl up my neck. Not guilt. Exposure. My family had finally billed me at the one address I had kept completely clean. On my break, I called that agency back and did the thing I am actually best at, which is procedure. Under federal law, once I tell them my employer prohibits these calls, they may not contact my workplace, and all further contact goes in writing. I said it twice, calmly, and I got a confirmation number. Confirmation numbers are love letters you write to your future self. When I hung up, Odessa Pike was standing in the break room doorway with 2 vending machine coffees. Des is 61. She worked the overnight desk for 26 years before she retired. She lives across the hall from me, and she has an unnerving habit of appearing at exactly the moment the ceiling comes down. She handed me a coffee. Sit, tell me all of it. So for the first time, I did the card, the box, the cigar box before it, the whole inheritance. Des listened like a dispatcher, nodding at the details that mattered, ignoring the ones that didn't. Then she said, "Utility daughter, I was one too." She sipped her coffee. So what's the plan? And right then, my phone buzzed with Renata's number. Renata doesn't do preamble. The issuer accepted the dispute provisionally, but to clear the balance off your liability before your rate lock expires, they need the notarized affidavit and a police report number within 10 business days. No affidavit, the balance stays yours, your debt to income breaks, and we lose the house. A pause. I'm sorry to put it that plainly. I thanked her for putting it exactly that plainly. Then I drove to the Harrow Bend Police Department and sat across a desk from Detective Ray Okonkwo of the Financial Crimes Unit, a tired, decent man with his reading glasses pushed up into his hair, and I asked him to tell me the truth about what a report would actually do. He did. A report is in handcuffs, he said. In family cases, prosecutors rarely file unless the victim pushes hard. Most of these end in a restitution agreement, quietly, through attorneys. He tapped the form. But I can't take a report against a family member. The name goes in the box. There it was. The entire machine, laid out on a government desk. To get my name back, I had to write down my mother's. Not shout it, not post it. Just write it in a small box on a form and mean it. Now, before you type, just pay it and keep the peace, and I know some of you are typing it. I want you to picture that last index card, the one with the 7-year-old's initials at the top. Peace that gets billed to you monthly isn't peace. It's a subscription. If you're with me, hit subscribe yourself, the free kind. Because what my mother did at her own birthday dinner is something I am still not over. That affidavit sat on my kitchen table with the notary blocked blank for 6 days. It sat through 3 shifts, 3 school runs, 3 suppers, and 1 science project involving a volcano. I had stopped being afraid of my mother somewhere around the pantry. What I was afraid of now was the mirror, of becoming a woman who files paperwork against her own mother and calls it love. Then Thursday night, Bryn texted me directly, which told me the family had run completely out of intermediaries. Dad's in the ear. They think it's a stroke. Happy? I left Ren with Des and drove. And I want to be honest about that drive, 'cause it's the most honest thing in the story. Half of me was a terrified daughter. The other half was a dispatcher who had already clocked the timing. Both halves parked the car. At the hospital, they'd already run him, no deficits, clean imaging, blood pressure through the roof, and a body-keeping books its owner refused to open. They admitted him overnight for observation and called it a hypertensive episode. He was going to be fine. I stayed anyway, in the chair by the bed. Because love doesn't wait for the test results to decide whether to show up. At 2 a.m, my father woke up, found my wrist, and held it, and in the hum of that room he finally talked. He told me about his wedding day, how my mother, in her going-away dress, made him drive past Ada's house on the way out of town so she could put her envelope on top of the refrigerator before the honeymoon. He told me that the day Ada died, my mother stood at that sink and washed out that cigar box, dried it with a dish towel, and put it in the cupboard like an heirloom. She doesn't know another way to love, Lainey, he said. It's the only language anybody taught her. And for 1 long minute in that dark room, I saw her, 15 years old, in an apron that smelled like fryer oil, sliding half of everything she'd earned across a kitchen table toward a woman who never once said thank you. I held that girl in my mind, and I ached for her, truly. But pity is not a payment plan. When I stepped into the hallway, my mother was standing under the exit sign at the far end, eyes red, and she opened her mouth and made me the last offer she would ever make. We sat in an empty waiting room at 3 a.m, under lights that flatter absolutely no one, and my mother laid out terms like a woman who had consulted somebody, because she had. Here's what's going to happen, she said, even-voiced. You'll withdraw the dispute. You'll settle that card quietly. It's $11,000. You have it, we both know where. You'll resume your contribution. And on the 14th you will come to my birthday dinner at the Copper Ox and sit in your seat, and none of this will ever be spoken of again. She smoothed her coat over her knees. And if you file those papers instead, hear me, Delaney, you will not have a family, and Wren will not have grandparents. You will have done that to her, not me. There it was. My daughter slid across the table like a chip. I asked her, quietly, if she had ever once run the math in the other direction, what the family might owe me. She looked at me with genuine confusion, like I had asked her to divide by 0. And then she said the thing that told me the whole story, hers, mine, and the boxes. I paid my mother until the day she died, every week. I never complained. I never counted. She caught it, but we both heard it. She counted everything. It's your turn. That's the order of things. My turn. Not a round to be corrected, a shift to be covered. Like the debt was a family business handed down, and I was refusing my inheritance. I stood up and buttoned my coat. Noted, I said. And on the drive home I laughed once, out loud, alone at a red light, because of course her birthday, same restaurant, probably the same table. My mother does love a full circle. As it happens, so do I. Friday, Des sat me down at her kitchen table, read that affidavit front to back through her drugstore glasses, and pushed it back across the placemat. She asked exactly one question. What are you more scared of losing, your family or your job in it? I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. Des nodded, the way you nod at a monitor, because the silence was the vital sign. I had been the steady one, the reliable one, the one who handles it, for so long that I could not find the seam where the job ended and I began. Losing them was grief, and grief I know how to carry. I've carried worse. But losing the title, Lainey will take care of it? That's the one that whited out my mind, which is exactly how I knew the title was the tumor. Get your coat, Des said. She drove me to the notary in the strip mall next to the credit union and stood beside me smelling like coffee and peppermint gum while I signed my whole legal name, the one they had been spending, and the stamp came down with a thunk like a diagnosis. Signing's the medicine, Des said in the car. Filing's the dose. The papers went into my bag, unfiled. The deadline was Monday at 9. And between me and Monday stood exactly one birthday dinner. Saturday night I was folding laundry when Wren appeared in the doorway in her dinosaur pajamas, holding the stuffed otter she only carries when something is heavy. She climbed up on my bed, arranged the otter with great ceremony, and asked the question she had been carrying since October. Mom, are Grandma and Grandpa mad because of me? Because you bought me the steak? 7 years old. They had held an account open in her name for 14 months, and she was already trying to make the first payment. That is how it starts. That is exactly how it starts. I put down the laundry and sat on the edge of that bed, and I said it slowly, because I was laying bricks. Nobody pays to sit at my table. Not you. Not anybody. You did nothing, and you owe nothing, and none of this is yours to carry. She studied me with that lie detector face kids have. Then she nodded once, tucked the otter under her chin, and was asleep in 4 minutes, the way children sleep when somebody else has agreed to hold the heavy thing. I stood in the doorway a long time watching her breathe. I had already decided to go to that birthday dinner, not to perform and not to fight, to close it out properly, face to face, the way you clear a call before you sign off your shift. And so that some day, when Wren asks me how it ended, I can tell her that her mother walked out the front door, not the back. I laid out my good gray dress. I put the affidavit in my bag, and I practiced one sentence in the mirror. The copper ox, the 14th, the long table by the fireplace. She reserved the exact same table. I genuinely don't know whether that was a message or whether my mother simply cannot imagine the furniture of the world being rearranged. But this time, everything was different, and the differences were the tell. There was a booster seat already set for Wren, which the hostess mentioned had been requested in advance. There was a place card with her name on it in my mother's handwriting. There were crayons fanned out like a peace treaty. Wren greeted us at a warmth I hadn't felt from her since high school. We got Wren the ribeye. Medium, that's right, isn't it? It was right. That was the eerie part. The machine knew precisely what generosity looked like. It had simply never priced it for us before. My father looked good, color back, tearing his roll into small pieces the way he does. Cody's watch caught the firelight every time he reached for something. Grant talked about the deer season he was planning. Nobody mentioned the bank. Nobody mentioned the dispute. And my mother washed me down the whole length of that table the entire meal. Pleasant, unblinking, a treasure waiting on a deposit to clear. I ate, I complimented the potatoes. Wren colored a dinosaur orange and named him Gerald. They teach you in dispatch that the calmest voice on the line is the one holding the map. My bag was on my lap the entire night. Then, as the plates were cleared and before the cake could come out, My mother picked up her spoon and tapped it twice against her wine glass, and the table hushed. "Before we do the cake," she said, smiling directly at me, "I have something for Delaney." The envelope was cream, heavy stock, tied with a thin gold ribbon. And for one split second, I'm going to be honest with you, the child in me, the one who still hoped, thought maybe it's an apology, maybe 41 years of arithmetic ends with a card that has flowers on it. I untied the ribbon. Inside was a single typed page. Across the top, in bold capitals, Family Restoration Plan. I'm going to tell you exactly what it said, because I have read it many times since. Item 1. Delaney withdraws the bank dispute within 48 hours. Item 2. Delaney assumes the MasterCard balance as a family matter, handled privately. Item 3. Delaney resumes monthly support, adjusted from $350 tossed $475 for cost of living. Item 4, and this is the one I want you to sit with. In exchange, Ren receives full family access. Holidays, birthdays, grandparents, my daughter's grandparents, offered back to me at a rate increase in exchange for my signature. There was a line at the bottom for that signature, with the date already filled in my mother's handwriting. Of course, the machine does not apologize. It issues terms. My mother folded her hands and spoke in her blessing voice, the one she uses for grace before meals. "Sign it, sweetheart, tonight for my birthday, and this family will be whole again." She smiled around the table. "Family means nobody counts what it costs." I want you to hold that sentence up next to a wooden box full of index cards with a 4% column running down the margin. The greatest lie my mother ever told, and she told it as a toast. Bryn produced a pen from her purse. Cody's pen, the gold-capped one. I looked at the pen, then I looked at my daughter, halfway through a stake she did not have to earn. And I stood up. The last time I stood up at that table, I made an announcement. This time I didn't raise my voice at all, which is exactly why every head at that table leaned in. 11 years on the desk teaches you that the quietest voice in the room sets the volume. I looked only at my mother. "Before I answer," I said, "I want to tell you something I know. I know about the cigar box on Grandma Otta's refrigerator. I know half of every paycheck from the root beer stand went into it from the week you turned 15. Every Friday, she called it board. I know Denny paid nothing and got a truck, and you got the dishes. And I know you carried an envelope to that refrigerator on the night of your own wedding in your going-away dress." My mother went absolutely still. Down the table, my father set his fork down without a sound. "You paid your mother until the day she died," I said, "and I think I might be the only person at this table who understands what that cost you." Bryn was staring at me with her mouth slightly open. She had never heard any of it, not one word. "So I'm not going to shame you. I'm not going to read anything out loud. I'm not going to perform for this family the way that Paige wanted me to." I touched the cream-colored paper. "But the box stops here, Mom. I'm not taking the hand off." Then I told her, plainly, in the voice I used to give directions to people having the worst night of their lives, exactly what Monday would hold. At 9 in the morning, the affidavit and the police report would be filed. I had told Detective Okonkwo I would not be pushing for charges. I said that part clearly, and I watched Bryn's shoulders drop half an inch when I did. "I don't need you in handcuffs, Mom. I need my name back. The balance goes back to whoever made it." I met her eyes. "That's not revenge. That's arithmetic. You're kind." My mother's voice cracked upward for the first time in my life in a public room. "You ungrateful." And then it just stopped, because I hadn't moved, hadn't flushed, hadn't given her any surface to strike. I laid the family restoration plan down next to the bread basket, unsigned, which felt like the correct filing location. I counted out cash for 2 dinners, mine and my daughter's, and set it under the salt shaker with a good tip. The arithmetic of a woman who pays for exactly what her family ordered. "Noted," I said, one last time, to no one and to all of them. And then the sentence I practiced in the mirror, the one that had been coming for 22 years. "The box is closed." I helped Ren into her coat. She hugged her grandfather and told him happy birthday for Grandma in her church voice. And my father held on one beat too long and whispered something into her hair that I couldn't hear. We walked out past the fireplace and the white tablecloths in a dining room that had gone politely deaf the way dining rooms do. Nobody clapped. Real life doesn't clap. But at the door, Anthony, our waiter, the same kid from October still working that floor, caught my eye and gave me the smallest nod ever recorded by a human being. I was buckling Wren into the back seat when I heard footsteps on the asphalt. My father, moving faster than a man 9 days out of an ear should move. Reflex took over. I met him halfway and took his elbow, 2 fingers on the inside of his wrist before either of us said a word. He waved me off, breathing hard, and stood there under the parking lot lights with his hands in his pockets, looking exactly like the man in the pole barn hiding from weather. I can't stand up to her, he said finally. I want you to know that I know that about myself. I ran out of that a long, long time ago. He looked back at the restaurant window. But I see all of it, Lainey. I always have, and what you just did in there. He stopped. His jaw worked. He never finished that sentence, and I never needed him to. It was the closest thing to a defense he had ever offered me, delivered 41 years late, in a parking lot out of her earshot. I decided to keep it anyway. Some people can only love you in the parking lot. Through the window, I watched my mother straighten her napkin, spine perfect, and turn to Bryn. She said something brief. Bryn went very still, the exact stillness I recognized from the inside. The seat I had just emptied was already being filled, because the machine does not grieve. It restaffed. I drove us home past the dark storefronts of Harrow Bend, and my eyes stayed dry the whole way. I had done my grieving in pieces over years. That dinner was just the receipt. Monday at 9, I kept my appointment. My hand did not shake. It was the only signature my family ever got out of me that I read first. The week after brought 2 phone calls I expected, and one I truly did not. Renata called Wednesday, almost cheerful, which for Renata is a standing ovation. The issuer's letter was in my file. The disputed balance was suspended from my liability pending investigation. Underwriting had accepted the documentation and my written explanation of the cosign history. The rate lock held. "Congratulations, Lainey," she said. "Go buy your yellow house." I sat down on my kitchen floor with the phone against my ear and let myself feel all of it for exactly 1 minute. Detective Okonkwo called to confirm the report was in the system and told me what I had already made peace with. These cases inside families almost always resolve as a restitution agreement, quietly through attorneys. "No handcuffs," he said. "Paperwork." "Good," I told him. "Some victories are paperwork. Those are the ones that hold." The third call was Bryn. No preamble, no tears. For the first time in years, no performance. Her voice low and flat, like somebody reading a lab result out loud. "Mom says that since you've abandoned this family, I should start covering my share now." A pause. She used that word, share. Then, quieter, "Lainey, was there really a box?" And I realized my sister was standing at the top of the same chute I had just climbed out of, hearing the first click of the machine turning toward her. "You'll see it eventually," I said. "Your cards start with the word gift. They don't end with it." I wasn't cruel about it, and I didn't rescue her either. She wouldn't have believed me yet. I just told her the truth and hung up. 3 weeks later, a woman from the title company handed me 2 keys on a paper ring. Moving day was small and loud and perfect. Desk carried boxes of books like a woman half her age, embossed everyone within shouting distance. 2 of my coworkers came straight off an overnight and wrestled my secondhand couch through that yellow front door sideways laughing while I stood on my own porch and let them. It took me 36 years to learn how to say that sentence. Wren's bed went against the left wall of her room, under the east window, exactly where I had measured it with my eyes months before. The next morning the light landed on her like it had read the plan. My family's silence held all winter formal as a treaty. The restitution agreement was worked out through an attorney, quietly, the balance settling back where it had always belonged. I signed nothing that year except my own mortgage, which I read twice. Every page, out of new habit. But I have to tell you about the compass, because that's the part I didn't see coming. My father came by on moving day. He stayed 20 minutes and never made it past the front hallway, hands in his pockets, looking at the house the way he looks at engines, approving of the bones. On his way out, he stopped in front of Wren, crouched down with some effort, and pressed something into her hand, a small brass compass scratched all over, the one he carried in his coat pocket at the mill for 41 years. And then my father, the man who watched a wooden box swallow both his daughters' childhoods and said nothing for 4 decades, leaned down to my 7-year-old's ear and gave her the only inheritance that ever mattered. "Don't tell your grandmother," he said, "and don't let anybody write it down." Wren, who understood none of it and somehow all of it, shook her grandfather's hand very solemnly. "That page ends there. Unbalanced, unbilled, free." These days, Sunday mornings belong to a diner 4 blocks from the Yellow House. Vinyl booths, coffee that could strip a deck, and a waitress named Mabel who calls everybody sugar. Wren orders first. That's not an accident. That's the house rule. She gets the tall stack with extra whipped cream, and nobody at that table asks whether she's earned it, and nobody slides her a basket of bread, and nobody writes anything down. I didn't feed her before we came. She ordered first. Last Sunday, in the middle of the pancakes, my phone buzzed. "Bryn, hey, things are really tight right now. Is there any way you could—" I didn't read the rest. "And I want you to notice what I didn't feel. No anger, no satisfaction, no old tub behind the ribs. Just a familiar diagnosis walking through a familiar door." I typed 1 line back. "No, but if you ever want out, I know the way." Then I turned my phone face down next to the syrup, which is where phones belong on a Sunday. Maybe she'll take me up on it one day. The machine is still running out on Hollis Road. Machines like that don't stop, they just restaff. But its oldest account is closed, and its newest one ends with a little girl who will never know her sneakers had a price written in a box behind the pickled beet. A check came to $19.40. I tipped like a woman who used to wait for permission. And then my daughter and I walked home, 4 blocks, uphill, to a house that has never once billed us for the light. Here's the one thing I know now that I didn't know at that steak dinner. Love that keeps a ledger was never love. It was alone. And the bravest thing you will ever do is close the book, pay for your own pancakes, and teach your child that a seat at the table is a birthright, not a bill. That's my story. 1 empty placemat, 1 wooden box, 1 signature that gave me back my name. If this reminded you to pull your own credit report, or to stop paying rent on a seat at somebody else's table, take it as your sign. Do it this week, not someday, this week.